Faster than a fraudulent performance measure, stronger than a misplaced decimal point, able to leap complex compliance requirements at a single bound. It's Super Auditor! Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Auditors Save the World, one audit project at a time, where we bring you thrilling tales of daring audits and brave financial reviews. Here, our heroes don't wear capes, but they do wield the power of empirical evidence. Brought to you by the pros at Yellowbook-CPE. In each episode, we interview those legendary auditors who have truly rescued the day. Stay tuned, listeners, because this is one story you won't want to miss. And folks, don't forget to subscribe to our show in your podcast app of choice. And now, here's your host, Lita Hart-Fanta.
In the heart of Silicon Valley, where data rules, innovation races, and algorithms hum through the night, one smart auditor dares to ask the most powerful question of all. Are we using this tech for good? Joe, the fearless city auditor who brings brains, ethics, and heart to the frontier of artificial intelligence. Armed with analytics sharper than a silicon chip and a moral compass stronger than a magnetic field, Joe leads his city's audit team into the digital future. He uses the power of AI not just to crunch numbers, but to shine light where it's most needed. His data-driven work uncovers inequities, improves city services, and makes sure that every neighborhood, not just the loudest or the wealthiest, gets the help it deserves. City leadership didn't just accept Joe's innovations, they embraced them. They saw the power of data to reveal patterns, guide funding, and bring fairness into focus. Because progress without principle isn't progress at all. Tell us about your equity project. What was the objective? Where did it come from?
So a couple things, just to provide broad context. San Jose has a pretty large foreign-born population.
Okay.
More than 40% of the population is foreign-born, and this goes all the way back to, we have a large Vietnamese population going back to like the 1970s, that period, to a lot of folks from Latin America. There's the city, has made different policies around language access to make sure that, language is not a barrier to access to services. There's a council policy that, trying to overcome disparities in outcomes across the community in different ways. And in that context, I received direction from the mayor to explore the scope, and I have it written down over here, the scope and costs associated with conducting an audit of access to and use of our most critical city services in traditionally marginalized communities. So that's a lot to kind of take in. And so I proposed a series of audits so that we can...
Did you go have a beer right after he said that? Did you go, I got to relax. This is crazy.
I really need to kind of define what it is we're even talking about.
Yeah.
What are our most critical city services? And
yeah.
And obviously he's putting it on the auditor to define, so what's more critical? Is it streetlights? Is it library hours? Is it
emergency services?
And so emergency services, sewer services. Who's going to say that sewer services are not the most critical services? So we had to kind of get our brain around that. Access and use also depends on what program you're talking about. And then obviously defining what are traditionally marginalized communities. So again, I proposed a series of audits. One thing that the city council had done in recent years is they highlighted a couple big areas they wanted to focus the organizational efforts. One is around community safety. One is around reducing unsheltered homelessness. One is around beautification of neighborhoods, or cleaning up our city. One was on economic development. So what we had determined was like, okay, this is what the city council has determined as some of the most important aspects of government services right now, because this is what the community is clamoring for. So let's look at some of the programs that fit within these buckets of work. And that's what we're going to start with. And so we've done two audits. One was around neighborhood blight reduction programs. There's things like graffiti removal, illegal dumping eradication, dumpster days, which are basically just getting large containers out in the community to clean up. The department in charge, Parks, Recreation, Neighborhood Services, has a program called Beautify SJ. And they had a small grant program for local neighborhood groups to do some beautification work.
Okay.
So that was the first body, and we looked at that. We also the next audit, we looked at traffic safety programs, and that was in the community safety. And this was, again, we weren't looking at the big capital project. We're looking again some of these smaller traffic safety programs. Where are they putting high visibility crosswalks? Where are they doing like some of these smaller street traffic calming projects, traffic humps, things like that. Also school safety. So there's a lot of traffic education programs out at the school program in the schools, what have you. So those are the two audits we did. So that's how we defined what are those critical services, because they were kind of already, I would say they were already defined, but they'd been identified as areas of focus by the organization broadly to meet these broad council goals around community safety and cleaning up the neighborhoods. So that was one of the first things we did, is trying to put our brain around that.
That's an interesting assignment. Parks Department was working on urban blight.
It's Parks, Recreation, and Neighborhood Services.
And Neighborhood Services. Okay.
Yeah. So it's it's a large department handling all the parks, all the community centers.
I got you.
And a lot of these, these neighborhood, obviously they handle illegal dumping, graffiti removal, all that, as well as programs for like different sorts of programs for neighborhoods.
So they already had a program in place to do these dumpster days and clean things up, but they got a grant and they added to their services. Is that correct?
No, so they would give money to small neighborhood groups to do some small projects within their community.
Okay.
And so we were looking, so in each of these, we really try to answer three questions. One is, how are these services accessed or used by the community?
Okay.
Is equity factored into service delivery in any way? And then the last one is looking at program data. Do we see any disparities in terms of service delivery by location, by language, by whatever?
Okay.
And so those are the three questions we try to answer in each of those programs. And it sounds pretty straightforward, but again, we still had to figure out how to do the work.
Right.
A couple things that the other one that we really did define was the traditionally marginalized communities, which I think we, intuitively have an idea of what we're talking about, but what does that mean from an audit standpoint? We had a few different indices that we could use. So the city had developed what was called a San Jose Equity Atlas, which looked at different demographic factors at the census tract level. And it really identified census tracts with high proportions of people of color and lower household incomes. There was also not the San Jose, but a regional transportation agency had created a similar index that brought in a few other demographic factors such as age, disability status, things of that nature. And a third that we also used was called the Healthy Places Index, which was something from a local California university had put this one together, which looked at those demographic factors as well as some other community,
like access to food and exercise,
health indicators, education.
Okay.
So we had these different indices that we could use, and then so that helped us in that third question about looking at the disparities, because what we were doing is we'd pull all this program data, and when I say we, I didn't do any of this. The
royal we.
I would suggest things, and magically it would happen by folks in the office. They would take the data and then geocode it, and then compare it to the census tract data in those different indices, and we get a sense for if there was any disparities across these different areas. So it was really, the reports were pretty thin, but it was a lot of analysis underneath it. So, those were the audits, and my real hope was basically we can take that kind of methodology, even though there's going to be different program data. Each of the programs as we move forward are going to be different in how we look at them, because how you kind of flow chart the access piece is going to be different. But can we take that methodology and just kind of replicate it moving forward as we kind of cycle through some of different other critical services that we may identify down the road? So we've done two so far. We don't have one right now in our work plan, but my intent is to keep kind of cycling around.
Okay.
Because it's important to the organization. It's important generally, of course.
Right.
And so I thought it was an interesting way we could take this broad subject and try to define it in ways that made sense.
What kind of stuff did you see when you did that? What did you see?
So a couple things. One is what we found at a high level is, like, if I just start with the beautification work, the amount of graffiti removal requests and the amount of illegal dumping requests were very much, there were higher propensities of those in these communities that we defined as priority communities because they were scoring high in these different indices.
Okay.
Propensity of illegal dumping, so they were way more impacted than other parts of the community, which I think everybody kind of had a sense for that, but we had the data behind it.
Well, that's great. That's huge.
That being said, when we were actually looking at service delivery, we weren't seeing disparities. So they were still getting out and eradicating graffiti in the same time frame as other parts of the community. They were still picking up the illegal dumping in the same time frame. So from an eradication standpoint, they were meeting their targets, but the impact on the community still was pretty high. Something similar was on the traffic safety, is that we were seeing a lot of those traffic calming projects. A lot of them were in those priority communities. But again, because a lot of the high traffic, high incident areas or street corridors were also in those priority communities. So there was definitely a higher impact in some of from a negative standpoint in terms of graffiti or traffic incidents or whatever. But the city was doing a really good job of focusing their efforts and their resources.
How do you define impact? Trying to follow this. So impact means there's more of it?
So the impact, I guess, would be what I just said in terms of higher propensity for graffiti or illegal dumping. In that case, they were impacted more in that area. On the traffic safety, the city had identified the traffic safety corridors to focus their efforts based on collision data, based on other sorts of,
accident, right?
Traffic safety data, high speeds, accidents, what have you. And like I said, so the impact in the sense that there was a lot of alignment or at least overlap between those high traffic corridors or high priority safety corridors is what they were calling them, which we kind of looked at and made sense based on what we were looking at, and some of those equity communities, those scored high. So those areas that scored high in those indices, the healthy place in it, whatever, definitely had that need based on what the data was telling us in terms of graffiti, in terms of illegal dumping, in terms of it being a priority safety corridor for traffic purposes. But the city was really spending their time and focusing their efforts out there. And so we weren't seeing that access was a barrier at a high level. That being said, we did see some other things. There were some programs that very much were still driven by requests from the community. And so where it really stood out was some of the traffic education programs or traffic school safety programs. Because both the Department of Transportation, school, it was a small group. And so they were really reliant on requests from schools to go out and do their traffic safety education. They knew they didn't reach all the schools. But when we looked at the data, the fewer schools within these priority communities were receiving that traffic education than what you'd expect if it was equally distributed across the city. Same thing with crossing guards. And so the school crossing guard program out of the police department, there were fewer in those areas than what we expect if it was equally distributed. Part of it's a resource question. Part of it was it was reliant on schools to reach out. And we just did do a very good job in all that outreach across the community. So that was one that was really important. The last piece that was just common throughout is just language accessibility. If I mention like some of this information about if it's by request, but I just mentioned a large proportion of our population is foreign born. A large proportion don't speak English at home. And if the only request form is in English, what does that do in terms of access? And there is a city policy, language equity and guidelines. It's a city policy which basically tells departments make a reasonable effort to reduce any barriers to services from a language access standpoint. And at a very minimum, we're supposed to translate things to Vietnamese, Chinese, and Spanish, because those are the three largest non-English languages, to the extent possible. So that's a continued
effort.
issue in the city. So those are the areas where we had more recommendations, but there were some smaller ones here and there. But overall, we saw departments are trying in some of these areas. There's a real need in the community because there are disparate impacts of illegal dumping, graffiti across the city. So that's where we took that. Just going back to the beginning, we took this really broad subject that the mayor directed her office to look into, and we're able to craft these pretty narrowly focused audits in a couple areas.
Yeah.
And so as I said, hopefully we'll kind of cycle around and look at those disparate impacts or disparate access points.
So am I concluding correctly? So these communities they have a higher volume of dumping and graffiti, and they have a higher volume of traffic incidents. And the city, you found, was responding to their requests just as quickly as they would to a advantaged neighborhood, let's call it.
Correct.
But the issue is there's such a volume that the city wasn't able to stay on top of these things as well as they could.
I'm not sure as I would say that. I think it's just I think the volume overall, regardless of where it was, requires a certain level of resources, and whether we had those resources was a different question. So yeah, we didn't ask that question.
All right.
In any resource constraint environment like city government,
right,
then they got to figure out how to prioritize, and they got to figure out what's a reasonable time frame to responding.
Right.
We weren't seeing that these communities, even though they might have had a higher impact, they weren't being the timeliness of response wasn't affected because it was in this community.
Great.
Now, there's a broader question which obviously comes up is, should more resources just be dedicated to those areas? And that's a fair question, but that's a different question, basically. And I think that we were looking at the eradication piece. They're actually moving more in like, especially for graffiti, illegal dumping, that is also graffiti, away from just eradication, more into education and enforcement. And I think that is where some of the more proactive work, maybe those should be more focused in those areas. That work was just starting when we did that audit. So it wasn't something we could look at because we didn't, it was brand new. They were trying to move away from that reactive eradication work, which we were looking at, to the more proactive education and enforcement work, where they could think about, okay, should we deploy in these areas where there's higher incidence? It was too brand new for us to really spend any time there.
So eradication, sure, the response on that was good. So yeah, we know that when you start graffiti, it just tends to multiply. So how are they going to enforce graffiti?
That's a great question.
Oh, okay.
So the plan, and again, this will be subject potentially to a future audit, is using the data they have of locations. They've already deployed a handful of cameras and trying to use license plate readers to identify the worst of the bad actors. A lot of the bad actors, from what the data, early data was telling them, is that there was a lot of basically illegal haulers who were, taking stuff from a construction site, getting paid very little to supposedly take it to the dump, but really just go down the road and dump it on the side of the road.
Right.
Trying to identify who those worst of the bad actors are, and then go after them that way. Again, that's pretty brand new. Obviously, there's a lot of concerns in the community about license plate readers, so we'll see what happens from a privacy standpoint with that. But but so there's
lots of, gosh, there's just so many questions as I'm listening to you. I'm like, well, what about this or what about that? And
what about that? Yeah, there's plenty.
How did you keep your team focused on these very specific questions?
Really just try to focus on those three questions I mentioned before. How is this stuff accessed? Has equity been factored into the program? And then what is the data telling us in terms of, are there disparities in service delivery? That second question, again, I mentioned that small grant program that the Parks Department had for groups, they had actually thought about that because some of the more established, I mean, they didn't want to just put money out to the community where the most established neighborhood associations were located, because that wasn't going to be necessarily fair. And so they really made an effort to reach out to those communities that didn't have those long, well-established neighborhood groups to figure out who in the community can take on this work and how can we, put money into these communities to help them, beautify their own neighborhoods. So that was an effort that they did. And that was one where we saw the results of those efforts. And we reported that. And that report is like, hey, this is something they did and this is the results. And then we didn't have a finding. It was just, this is what happened. Move on.
Yeah. So when you presented your report to city council, how did they react?
They were actually very appreciative of the fact that we were even looking at it. This isn't the sort of data that they had seen before. These are questions they had, but never had really great answers. The one thing that came out of it, which was really interesting, as I mentioned, the Parks Department, they actually took our analysis and just built it into their program service delivery. And now they're tracking the way we did the work. They're tracking it that same way now. And so they created this dashboard they have on, I think it's an internal dashboard where they're actually tracking their service delivery in the same way we did in the audit and looking to make sure that, hey, that our work is on point and we're not, there's not disparate impact. So
great.
I think the work was, they're appreciative of the work. They, again, like any good council member, they want to know what's next. And
well, good.
So we'll see.
That's beautiful. And did you use AI to help you with this? You were telling me that you've been doing some stuff with AI lately.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Yellowbook-CPE, the heroes behind the jumbo bundle of self-study courses. With a 1-year subscription, you get access to over 180 hours of top-notch CPE content. Dive into thrilling tales of agile, IT auditing, fraud, and internal controls. All courses carry NASBA's quality seal, so you know they've got the superpower of trustworthiness. Just click the link in the description to sign up. And now, back to our story.
You were telling me that you've been doing some stuff with AI lately.
We didn't use AI for that. I'm trying to think. No, I don't think we did.
Because there's a lot of data analytics in there.
There's a lot of data analytics. A lot of it was through ArcGIS, and we have some folks here who have become pretty competent in that area in terms of geocoding a lot of this data and then comparing it across different parts of the community. We've used AI in a few different ways. So last year, sometime in 2024, we created a policy, an internal AI audit policy. And partly it was because I knew people were going to start using AI and I wanted to kind of, I don't want to say put guardrails up, but at least provide some guidance. The policy is pretty principles based. It's like responsible use. Our office's credibility depends on the accuracy of the reports. So you can't use ChatGPT or Copilot as source. You gotta be able to trace it back to the original source, that sort of thing. Ethical considerations.
What did you say about ethics?
Well, really, it's you can't be putting anything into ChatGPT that would violate the city's ethics policy. So. Again, it's just kind of builds on that responsible use piece.
All right.
And there's the equity piece. Obviously, ChatGPT is pulling from publicly available sources, and it may contain biases, so you got to be aware of that.
Okay.
So just, again, some high-level principle around responsible, ethical, equitable, traceable, that sort of thing. But also created I also try to put in some use cases. When is it helpful?
Okay.
Background research, around laws and regs.
Yes.
Summarizing other audit work.
Right.
Defining technical subject matter. Brainstorming around risks.
Defining technical subject matter. Help me with that.
Let me think. I'm trying to think of a good one. So we're doing an audit right now around some sewer rate stuff, and a lot of the calculations around sewer rates really go around all the components that go into the flow that goes out to the wastewater treatment plant.
All right.
You can go deep into jargon really fast.
Okay, sure.
And so just can you explain this to me in plain English, sort of thing.
Okay,
Um,
good. So taking maybe some guidelines that the sewer department or the sewer folks had,
yeah,
plugging
that
it
sort
into
of
AI
thing.
and saying, "Tell me what they're talking about here."
Yeah.
Okay, good.
You
That's
mentioned
cool.
kind of the data analysis piece. That's a really good use of AI. We've had folks here say, oh, here's my data set. I want to do this. What's the right formula to use?
Ah,
That's really helpful. So a lot of things like that. I actually had done a training for some local auditors on some of the brainstorming pieces. It's like,
yeah.
for example, I mentioned that high level direction I got for the equity audits or the traditionally marginalized the access and use audits. We get very high level direction from council. So we'll get a council's like, can you go do an audit on access of services by persons with disabilities?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we need to define that and we need to figure out what we're going to be looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And, the training I gave to some other auditors, like, okay, first thing I did was if I look at that, and it was just a test case, it wasn't a real audit. I just put into ChatGPT, what are the state, federal, state, and local laws related to access for services by persons with disabilities? Within like 15 seconds, it gave me this whole list of, you got to
Mm-hmm.
start with the American Disabilities Act. There's the Fair Housing Act. There's this, there's that. Then I also did one related to like street pavement. So what if we did an audit or we are asked to go look at pavement maintenance? Again, there's so many ways you can go. Again, I did the same thing. What are the big risks here? And it gave me like a whole bunch of ideas. And then what are the controls I should be looking for? It gave me a bunch of ideas. What are some potential audit tests? And gave me a whole bunch of ideas. Now, all these things, like I said, auditors would do, but they wouldn't do in 2 minutes.
That's right. Yeah,
And
exactly.
so that's the sort of thing that I've been trying to teach my folks. Use it as a tool, as brainstorming, because it's going to give you at least get your brain moving. And obviously you need to adapt it to your work environment, because not what ChatGPT is going to tell you is not necessarily what our Department of Transportation is working through, and not the problems they
Right.
have.
Right.
And so that's something we did last year with the policy. The city has our IT department has really been pushing AI use and developing citywide policies, and
Really?
they've worked with ChatGPT to create a city GPT.
Ah,
And so it's not a large language model about all the like pulling from everywhere. It's basically a city specific
wow.
sandbox, basically. And then the IT director actually also created within that broad city sandbox an audit sandbox. So we have our own little GPT
Really?
community in our little office. We just have a handful of licenses. And we had 2 auditors go through this class with our IT department and San Jose State, which is just next door, and created 2 GPT models for our work on the back end. So one of our auditors created this model using our internal audit style guide, our report writing style
Mm-hmm.
guide,
Mm-hmm.
and then also fed a whole bunch of audit reports, or at least sections of audit reports that she thought were well written.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's created this report writing model. And so what
Great.
we've done it's brand new. What we've done in our last few audits we just published is, before it ever gets to me, they're running portions, or writing findings or portions of findings through the model. And it really helps kind of with deductive versus inductive writing. It really helps with reducing jargon, basic copy editing, all that. So what comes to me is a much cleaner version.
Beautiful.
And it's really helped out in that report writing.
Wow.
And so that's something we've done internally. We did another one around alt text. And so at the end of the audits, you run through the whole report through this alt text model, and it creates alt text for all the graphics in the report. Now, again, auditor has to go through and make sure it's right, gets responsible use, go back to our policy.
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, this isn't something that takes forever. I mean,
Yeah.
doing the alt text for 20 graphics it's not like hours and hours of work.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this did in 15, 20 seconds. And now it's just fact checking. Is this right? Is this right? Is this right? So these are a couple models we've created for our work.
Have you thought about taking the audit report and the audit documentation and trying to get them to cross-pollinate against each other in AI? Have you?
We've talked about it.
Yeah.
So we at the end of field work, we create what are called finding development sheets, which would basically just put all the elements of finding into a finding development sheet. And we were thinking, can we take those and use that to write the report? A little too clunky.
Okay. Okay.
It didn't work as intended. A lot of the context was left out. A lot of the, sometimes the finding of element sheet is just a series of bullets, so it's not going to be.
Sure.
So I think it's something that's still on our radar, but we're not there yet.
Yeah.
But we're going to keep playing with it and seeing where we can find more efficiencies as we go along, because I think it's a powerful tool.
That's beautiful. I love, of course, you're in San Jose, the Silicon Valley, the center of that kind of activity. Your IT team is being forward thinking about creating these personalized chat GBTs for your city and your audit team. That's amazing. You're way out there on the cutting edge with this.
Well, you said where we are. I give a lot of credit to our IT department. So
yeah, it's amazing.
They're kind of they're upfront on that. And then of course, like I said, I can't necessarily take credit for this stuff. It's I suggest things and magic happens outside my door. So
one of the more tedious tasks, I think, of the report writing process is taking every fact or sentence and time back to the audit documentation. And wouldn't it be great if ChatGPT would do that for you?
That is that's a great idea. Maybe I'll try to put folks on that, because I think, we're going through that process right now with a couple of different audits. So it takes a while. I'm curious what conclusions it would draw. I don't know what.
Yeah.
I don't know whether we could trust it. I don't know.
Right. Because I've had it analyze contracts and documents and point out areas of concern. And it doesn't obviously always hit everything I'm really concerned about, but at least it's a start.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the way you describe it is absolutely right. It's going back to the policy, is that the very first thing in our policy is about responsible use. And and that's the thing I keep emphasizing with folks when they use it. It's a start. It'll get you going. It will not answer your questions.
Right.
You need to answer your questions.
The way I think about it is like a really smart college graduate intern that you are tasking with something, but you still have to review.
That's the same description that I was at a training by our IT department to senior staff that I was invited to. And that's exactly how the IT folks described it. Is like,
is that right?
Think of AI as a very eager intern.
There you go.
That they will do a ton of work. You got to check it really closely, because you don't know what you're going to get. You have no idea what you're going to get.
And then you have to be very clear with the intern exactly what you want it to tell you and do.
Yes.
Or they'll go off on a tangent. So I noticed myself using AI, I have to keep, okay, wait a minute. Let me refine my directive. Let me refine it. That's really fun.
Yeah.
What a great discussion.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I've had a good time.
Yeah, thank you, Joe.
Thank you, brave listeners, for joining us on this adventure. We appreciate your loyalty. Take a moment to subscribe and share this podcast with all your audit allies. And don't miss out on Yellowbook-CPE's upcoming webinars. Because every superhero needs their training, and Yellowbook-CPE offers continuing education that's relevant, convenient, and as thrilling as the fight for justice. Until next time, audit on!